I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the 1 o'clock Ocean Tech slot. Daniela Fernandez is the founder and CEO of Sustainable Ocean Alliance. She's an award-winning social entrepreneur, thought leader, and international speaker on the entrepreneurial mindset, ocean innovation, technology, youth empowerment, and sustainability. And with that, I will turn it over to Daniela.
Thank you, Rob, and I'm so happy to have everyone here. You know, one of the things that I miss from going to conferences in person is actually seeing people's reactions and faces and feeding off of that energy. And unfortunately, we can't do that here. So I'm gonna try to translate as much of my energy to all of you and hope I'm getting the same response back. So before I dive into the ocean tech industries and technology examples that I'd love to share with all of you here, I do want to touch upon the background and the founding reason why SOA came to existence. I was a freshman in college at Georgetown University. I was 19 at the time. Going back to Peter's comment about involving the next generation, it's so critical. And when I was a student, I was very passionate about climate change, very passionate about solving for these very instrumental, planetary issues. But I didn't necessarily know the role that I could play as an individual, as a student, as a young person. And so after attending a meeting on the state of the ocean my freshman year, I came to the realization that there were two big gaps in this space. One, in these very high level convenings such as the UN, you had heads of state, you had CEOs, you had very high level individuals be a part of these conversations, but young people were not being invited to be a part of these conversations. They weren't a part of, they weren't even invited into the room. And so that was my biggest takeaway is how can we activate, how can we change the mentality of young people from being victims and from being just frustrated as to what's happening to our environment to being active creators, active entrepreneurs, active innovators and doers. So that was like the first takeaway. And the second one was every single scientist, every single head of state that spoke kept talking about the gravity of the problem. They terrified me with the statistics of what was going on in our ocean, but no one gave me any sense of hope. No one gave any sense of solutions or a path forward. And so that was my biggest takeaway is we also need to involve entrepreneurship, innovation, and solutions into this space because that is not part of the conversation. So with those two pillars in mind, SOA was formed. And then I moved out to San Francisco when I graduated from college in 2017 to build out the world's first ever Ocean Accelerator. And the Ocean Accelerator, as part of our community, was meant to support these early stage entrepreneurs that had a concept in mind for the ocean technology. And just to give a sense of our criteria is one, we focus on ocean impacts. So any company that goes through our accelerator program has to have tangible and measurable ocean impact. Two, they have to be profitable. They have to show the business case and profitability model because obviously the only way to scale is through capital injections. And three, they have to be scalable. They have to be able to be utilized outside their own region, right? And be able to be utilized in different areas. So that was the mentality as to the criteria we utilize to source these companies. To date, we've supported 29 ocean technology startups. And it's been fascinating to see the sectors and areas that they come from. And I'll talk about that now because, taking a huge step back, the reason why the ocean is just now starting to gain traction is because over the past 100 years, we've thought of the ocean only in three different mindsets. One, in extraction. What can we take from the ocean? What can we, take as far as fisheries or minerals? Two, in exploitation. What is in the ocean that we can also take advantage of? And then three, as far as transport. The ocean transports, I think it's around 80% of our economy, right? We need to make sure that we figure out a way to make that sustainable. So now the conversation is quickly transforming into how can we restore, how can we sustain, and how can we regenerate the health of the ocean? And that's when this new blue economy concept is coming about. So thinking about the areas where we have opportunities are one, around transportation. There's a lot of mandates right now around decarbonizing the shipping industry, which is something that we desperately have to do to meet our carbon targets. Two, around fisheries, we have to feed 3.5 billion people on the planet depend on fish as our primary source of protein. So we have to figure out a way to not only feed people, but make it sustainable, make it healthy for our ocean. Number three, renewables. We have to invest capital in figuring out ways to extract the power of the ocean through tidal technology to make it more sustainable. Four, around sustainable packaging. I'm sure all of you have seen that turtle. That turtle video that went viral, right, with the straw, and that's an example of storytelling that is really helpful in this movement, because people started to pay attention and started to think more about plastic and the plastic problem we have. But there's an entire market we have to disrupt. We have to figure out, how do we extract plastic from the ocean? How do we then take that plastic and turn it into a new company? And how do we build transparency around this process? So that's another industry to consider. And the last one I'll mention is marine tourism and reconstruction of our marine ecosystems. We have to figure out a way to replant corals, to plant mangroves, to plant seagrasses that can also serve as carbon sequesters of our environment and our ocean. So that's just a very brief overview of the different areas in the ocean technology space. I'll just recap them all again for people. So renewable energy is one, marine transportation is number two, fisheries and aquaculture is number three, sustainable packaging is four, and marine tourism and reconstruction is number five. So just to think about what that looks like. And then I'll give some very brief examples of some of the companies that we have. Rob, am I still good on time?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay, wonderful. We have 29 amazing companies, but I'll just distill the top ones that I want to share with you. So one company, it's called TradeMoto, and what TradeMoto has figured out how to do is imagine a Yelp for sustainable fisheries. So they want to make sure that people know where their seafood is coming from and make it as transparent as possible for the supply chain. Oftentimes we see supply chains claiming to be sustainable and claiming to be doing good for the ocean, but there's no way to really track that. So they built this platform. You should definitely check it out. The beta is live. It's trademoto.com. And that's around sustainability of fisheries. Another really exciting company is called Novaloop. And Novaloop is a chemical recycling company that's focused on taking that unrecyclable plastic waste and turning it into chemicals. So instead of it just going back into the ocean and landfills, they're actually changing the chemistry composition of this plastic and breaking it down and reselling it. And that company is, of course, tackling the circular economy and waste problem that we have. Another company around new materials is called Cruise Foam. And I love Cruise Foam. They found a way to take shrimp shells and turn it into styrofoam, because styrofoam is a product that doesn't die, it doesn't decompose, it just lives on forever. I hope that all of you also shiver when you see styrofoam being served at restaurants still, because I do. But Cruise Foam found a way to take these discarded shrimp shells and turn it into a styrofoam alternative. And they have some great partnerships with some major car companies that actually use styrofoam for their seats. So that was really fascinating to learn about. And one more example I'll give on the fishery side is Finless Foods. Finless Foods is a company that they're growing healthy marine animal cells in the lab instead of growing it out in the ocean. So they're trying to figure out a way to utilize lab biology to instead of going out and fishing unsustainable fish, they're going in the lab to make sure that we can make it more sustainable. And then the last one I'll give, just because it's exciting and we're going into the era of alternative energy, is CalWave. As I mentioned, tidal technology is going to play a very critical role in powering our economies. And I know the Biden administration recently made a pledge of improving our wind farms. So I would encourage all of us to take a very deep look at wave energy, because I also believe it's the next frontier in helping our planet. So I will pause there because I think I'm at time, Rob, and then I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, first, just for the audience, if you do have questions, please send them to the Q&A, not the chat. And I'm going to apologize in advance that I'm curating a little bit, so I'm not going to quote necessarily word for word, but please, audience, send your questions to Q&A. Daniela, you brought up two things that in your initial remarks that I wanted to highlight or at least bring up. One is the plastic extraction, I think, which is in some ways a microcosm for the carbon or greenhouse gas problem that we have in general, right? So even if we were able to stop all plastic entering, the environment, the oceans today, we still have we have to go negative on greenhouse gases as well as on plastic. Have you seen a lot of advancements on some of those technologies, or either in your accelerator or other things that you're working with, or any thoughts or observations that you've had on some of those challenges?
Yes, we actually have seen both on the extraction and new material production, because to your point, you kind of have to turn off the tap water, to keep it from running into the ocean, in terms of waste. So, for example, one of our companies is called Ocean Works, and what they're doing is they're building the marketplace for those people that are extracting the pollution from the ocean, the garbage or the plastic, and then pairing them with companies that have the incentive to then turn that waste into new material. So I think that's an example of a market model that needs to exist right now, right? Because if you don't have the sourcing, if you don't have the transparency as to where that waste is coming from, you really can't make any progress or headway. Another company that we've been working with, they're focusing on trying to understand a person's plastic footprint as well as a corporation's plastic footprint. So trying to do plastic offsets as well. And if a company is doing X amount of plastic production, how can they offset that by working with this company called Repurpose Global? So those are two examples of the marketplace situation where you can bring those two together, and also the extraction of plastic.
So one other thing, we've got a few audience questions coming in, but I did want to address also kind of on the community standpoint. I'm actually a scuba diver, have been for a long time, and that's one of those, I think you mentioned the communities of the three ways they interact with the ocean, but also a community that's committed to making sure that there's still places to dive and that are beautiful 10, 20, 30, or 40 years from now. Have you seen, there's a lot of groups scattered like that are dedicated to that. Have some of your work, you're the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. So I guess has some of your work been in bringing together some of those different groups, or can you speak to that a little bit on some of those challenges?
Absolutely. And just to also answer a question from the chat, we are in 165 countries, so we are very global in that sense, and we've accelerated and supported companies from over 15 countries at this point. So the way that SOA functions is in three ways. One, we have our global youth network, which is for young people that have an idea, a grassroots project, and what we do for them is we connect them to the community of like-minded individuals. We give them access to mentors. We give them access to microgrant funding, so they receive anywhere between $1,000 and $10,000 to bring their ideas to life. And then we have this community of mentors and supporters and investors, which is where Rob, to answer your question, we have a lot of different entities plugging in, saying, I'm doing my part through this nonprofit on the ground, but I want to do more and I want to support. So we're able to bring in those coalitions together and provide value to one another through our network. And then, of course, we have our accelerator program that supports these entrepreneurs. And then the last pillar of SOA that I should mention is we recently launched our venture fund. So we do have a venture arm to SOA to provide even more capital to these startups that are following our program.
As someone who's helped try and get a first-time venture fund off the ground, I wish you the best of luck. It's, I think, both its own challenge as well as something I think that obviously will mean a lot for the companies that you're working with in your accelerator program. And just to follow on that, before we turn over to a few of the Q&A questions, you mentioned your accelerator program and some of the mentors or things right there. I actually got to know Peter through both of us volunteering with the Clean Tech Open Accelerator program, which is another national and global program. Could you speak to maybe how you mentioned mentors or ways to volunteer, or how that your accelerator plays with some of the larger accelerator programs out there? Because there's a lot more now than there were 5 or 10 years ago. So could you speak to a little bit more about the accelerator program, how people might want to contribute there?
Absolutely. We are definitely accepting mentors. So if anyone's interested in signing up to be a mentor, please join. We like to think of the service that you're providing for entrepreneurs is critical, but also making connections with the ocean community, right? That we need to expand and support. So we are looking for mentors. We're also looking for investors. We often have investors become mentors as well to have that direct pipeline to the talent that we are supporting. And what we do in our accelerator program, of course, it was in person pre-pandemic, but now we're virtual. We host a 4-week program online. We do mentor matchmaking, pairing. We do our 2 big demo days, which Peter mentioned. Definitely check them out. They're happening in July and in October of this year. We have 2 cohorts coming up, and that's when people can get more involved in our community. Because one of the areas is that we need so much support in the ocean space. It's such a nascent industry that we need to get everyone all hands on deck support. And I'm proud to say that Sustainable Ocean Alliance was the first accelerator program that has inspired other ocean technology accelerators programs out there to exist, and being the thought leader in the space to say this is important, and not just from the innovation side, but we're also working with governments to say, what role are you playing in the ocean space? How can you help spur innovation within your own regions? Because we're seeing so many obstacles that are coming up for entrepreneurs that have an idea, have a blueprint, have a concept, have raised capital, but then can't go forth and implement their solution or innovation. So there is a lot of work to be done in the cross-disciplinary aspects, because I don't believe that innovation will solve all the ocean problems. I believe that innovation paired with the right public policy and with the right corporate partnerships, will be the trio that will enable us to have like real impact in our ocean.
That actually plays to one of Ben Bingham's questions there, which on sunscreen and its impact on reefs. I personally have seen a number of, let's say, reef safe sunscreen was kind of a, what are you doing when I went on vacation 3 years ago? And now it seems to be what's on every brand. So could you maybe use that to illustrate your point, or any other insight you give us on, reef safe sunscreen?
Sure. Well, I think that it's a perfect example to show how just having reef safe sunscreen isn't enough if the consumer isn't informed, right? There might be a handful of us that are environmentalists, or, that are ocean lovers that care enough, but there are other places like Hawaii, for example, that they require you to use reef safe sunscreen before entering the waters. Obviously, let's not talk about the enforcement capacity of this, but even at least like having those, like you enter every beach and it says it right there, you have to wear reef safe sunscreen, and that's something that you don't see in many parts of the world. So I do think it's a matter of having the product available, right, having the innovation take place, but also having the policies in place to enforce, to incentivize corporates, incentivize individuals to make that change, is what's going to move the needle forward.
All right, so we have about a minute left. Brian Heilman has a question, or 2 questions related to reducing CO2 offenders in shipping, either how do you identify them, and maybe also playing off that, some public-private partnerships that exist towards those. Any quick thoughts on that? Because I do want to give you a chance to wrap up.
Sure. I mean, I would say that there's actually a global compact to reduce our carbon emissions in the shipping industry that's happening right now. So definitely like Google that. You'll find that the UN is working to set those standards. We haven't seen a lot of innovation in the shipping space from individual startups, but I do know that the shipping industry internally, they're trying to figure out their own R&D and their budgetary procedures to figure out how to remove some of the carbon from the atmosphere. So I think that that's a great example of an industry that's prime for disruption. So we need to get more ideas and more financing into it.
All right, well, thanks, Daniela. Unfortunately, 20 minutes does go very fast. So it was a pleasure meeting you. Again, this is Daniela Fernandez of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. What's the website?
It's soalliance.org. And if you want to reach me, I'm best via Instagram. So I'm at DV Fernandez.
All right, thanks, Daniela.